Here we go. We have our first set of college football playoff rankings back here with CBS Sports college football insider Richard Johnson. Let's welcome in former Ohio State standout Beanie Wells and former Alabama standout A.J. McCarron, the first quarterback in the BCS era to win back-to-back national championships. Ohio State looking to run it back. I had to work that in there, Beanie. All right, top four seeds. Here we go. It's Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M, and Alabama. A.J., are you surprised with the top four seeds here?
No, not at all. I thought Ohio State and Indiana have both been ranked up there all year. You got to put them in those spots. A&M and the SEC, strength of schedule, their record, it speaks for itself. And then Alabama, I think, is the hottest team in college football right now. Just from strength of schedule, the opponents they've played on a consecutive week-to-week basis, it makes sense for them to be in the top four.
You have any problem with the top four, Richard?
No, I think the top four shakes out as I thought. I went through this exercise ranking on Sunday for CBSSports.com, and, maybe I think Indiana a little bit better than Ohio State, I don't know, but you couldn't parse the resumes, right? When you stack the resumes with it, yes, Ohio State's resume does take it slightly above Indiana when you go and do it. And I agree with AJ on the Alabama point. They are not the team that lost to Florida State. I understand it is a result that happens, and I understand that is how you parse them versus Texas A&M, but I agree with AJ when he says Alabama's the hottest team in the country right now.
Yeah, they have four ranked wins. I mean, they have four ranked wins, which is more than anybody in FBS. Beanie, when you look at it, you could have made an argument that Alabama should be number one in the college football rankings when you talk about record strength and all of the metrics now that they are evaluating. But I still believe the committee values a 0 in the loss column, which is why they went Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M. What's your reaction to the top four?
I agree with it 100%. I think Ohio State and Indiana, those are the two teams that you could sit there and split hairs with. But when we talk about Alabama, they are one of the best, most improved teams in college football this season. But they do indeed have one of the worst losses now, especially when you look at how Florida State has played. So I think taking that into consideration, they're placed right where they should be. Texas A&M, another dominant football team, them playing in the SEC and them dominating the competition, I think certainly matters. I really love how the committee evaluated these teams and came together with their bracket. This is one of the unique years where I don't have a problem with it whatsoever.
Yeah, top four look pretty good right now. Richard, what are you thinking about the top four and how they played out so far in this first reveal?
Well, I think it's interesting with Texas A&M, though. Of these four, Texas A&M, although undefeated, especially with the SEC teams are concerned, Texas A&M's strength of schedule is a little, now it's undefeated. And your point about having a 0 in the loss column is massive, and that is helping A&M as well it should. But if they are to take a loss coming home, I'm very interested in where they would shake out because their strength of schedule, it's going to be in the teens. It's not going to be the strength of schedule that an Alabama has, for instance.
Yeah, and let's talk about their schedule. They have Missouri coming up on the road, which is always a tough place to play. And then they've got Texas to end the regular season. So this could look a lot different come 4 weeks here when we have another release.
Yeah, they're playing great ball right now, obviously, but Texas looks like they are starting to figure some things out. They're going to go to Austin Black Friday night, and it's going to be a powder keg.
Texas is 11th in the latest college football rankings, the first of the year. AJ, what have you seen from Texas? Is this a team you believe that will be ending up in the field when all is said and done?
No. Listen, I think they lose to A&M last game of the year. I think that third loss knocks them out. Would I love to see another SEC school in there? Yes, but I think one of the other 10-2 teams that the SEC will fill in that spot. The best thing that this committee has done compared to other years, and the biggest thing I was looking for is where did they have Ole Miss ranked compared to BYU and Notre Dame? It was the SEC and Greg Sankey adding this 9th in-conference game and going back and forth with the committee all off season, and ESPN throwing out money and saying, hey, 50 to 80 million for a 9th in-conference game, and Greg Sankey fighting it at the beginning saying, okay, well, if you want a 9th in-conference game, we want the metric of strength of schedule actually thought of and put into the thought process of coming out with these rankings. And I think by having Ole Miss ranked 6, shows that the committee is finally bought into and is full on committed to the strength of schedule. And that's awesome to see.
Yeah, they sit obviously right behind Georgia right there. Okay, you defer to Georgia as the team that beat them. But yes, Ole Miss with good wins against Oklahoma, for instance, sits there. And I think they're right about where they should be as well. We'll see if they can keep it. Last year, remember, Ole Miss looked pretty good, and then they clunked the way home. I think this Ole Miss team is a little bit more solidly built, but we saw last year that you can't just write them in. That Egg Bowl is always a funky game, no matter how good the teams are. Mississippi State, Jeff Levy's Bulldogs would love nothing more than to spoil the party for Ole Miss Thanksgiving weekend.
What does it tell you about this first set of rankings that Texas Tech and BYU are in the first set, and they, oh, by the way, happen to play this Saturday?
Yeah, well, obviously, I think we'll decide kind of the Big 12 team that gets to stay in the party after this weekend. I was a little surprised that BYU is as high as they are. Now,
undefeated, though.
I understand undefeated, so they're going to be ahead of Texas Tech. But it is a little curious. And also, obviously, Texas Tech with a weird loss. I don't even know if you call it a bad loss against Arizona State, but it is a very weird loss to have. And you're probably able to get over that if they are able to get over the hump and they're able to beat BYU. But I mean that because I think BYU's been getting away with it a lot this season. And we'll see when the rubber meets the road against Texas Tech this weekend if they will continue to.
Beanie, what are some other things that jump out to you here on this first set of rankings?
I think the team that I was more curious to see where they were ranked was Notre Dame, and Notre Dame sitting right there at that 10th spot. I find it fitting, and I'm glad the committee didn't penalize them for having 2 losses, considering how they did indeed lose the Texas A&M game. I thought that was a game that really could have went either way, and if it wasn't for human error, we're looking at that situation being a win for Notre Dame and them being a 1-loss team. So, kudos to the committee for getting that one right, but also BYU. I'm really curious their thought process on BYU throughout the way. It's clear that they believe they're one of the best teams in the country because they are undefeated. But like Richard just said, they have been playing it kind of close to the vest. And we saw last season BYU late in the year, they got to about 9-0, and that's where the wheels came falling off that football team. But they are built a little bit different with freshman quarterback and Bear Bachmeier and LJ Martin. So it's going to be interesting to see how this game does indeed pan out this coming weekend.
Do you think it will be an eliminator, this game on Saturday?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
You think it will be? Do you think the Big 12 ends up getting 2 teams in at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think because if Texas Tech can win this game and then win out, I mean, they may play BYU again,
right?
In the Big 12 championship game. But I do think this is an elimination game because I don't know if Texas Tech can get in with 2 losses. Then again, obviously, if Texas Tech ends up being the Big 12 champion, they'll find a way, and then it could be a 2-way.
Well, and we could very well have the Big 10 champion, right, with 1 loss, right? Like, if Indiana and Ohio State, they're on a collision course right now, we could very well have a situation there. Both teams are in with a loss. That wouldn't be a big deal, but then we figure out where they're going to be ranked, because if you look at Alabama, if they run the table rest of way, then we're going to have some interesting questions to answer in the coming weeks. Right now, we're answering the initial questions. AJ, what else sticks out to you about these initial rankings here?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing for me is seeing where they have the Big 12 schools, because listen, people are going to say it's biased, but I think if you go off a strength of schedule, a 10-2 SEC school, take a Vandy, Texas, a school like that where a 1-loss BYU, I think a 2-loss SEC, just based off of strength of schedule, gets the bump, and you add a 5th or possibly 6th SEC school to this thing. Listen, it usually tries to balance itself out, right, with the Big Ten and the SEC. The Big Ten's down this year more than it's been in the past probably 10 years from a sense of just their top teams. No Michigan, no Penn State. Listen, Oregon is not promised in this thing either. They got a tough one this weekend. So, I mean, you could possibly only have 2, most likely 3 Big Ten schools in this thing. I think that opens the door for another SEC school to be in this, because I don't believe the committee takes a two teams from the Big 12. I just don't see it.
The SEC should absolutely be in drive for five mode, so to speak, here when we get down to it the first weekend of December. I think if it keeps tracking like this, honestly, you're going to have bye week deciders in both the conference championship games if the top four stay like this. I also look a little bit further down the rankings. I look at number 20, Iowa. That's going to be really interesting if Oregon can get over that hump this weekend. That's going to boost Oregon and give Oregon a lift, I think, in next week's rankings. But that game is not a given. AJ just told you, by the way, this Iowa team gave Indiana everything they wanted down to the fourth quarter in that game. Oregon better watch out. They can lose that game.
Yeah, and that game you can see on CBS and streaming live on Paramount Plus. Oregon on the road in Iowa City, a ranked on ranked, which will be huge for Oregon if they can go in and win. That's going to be a strength on strength game, as well as Iowa's one of the best in not allowing points, and Oregon's the best at scoring points. So we'll see how that shakes out. Certainly will have implications on the college football playoff. Much more ahead here on CBS Sports HQ. Hey, huge night in America. The first college football playoff rankings have been released. Here's a look at your top 12. But those will not be the teams in the projected field, because a group of 5 team will come to play, and that team will be Memphis as of right now. They would face Georgia in the first round. Oregon and Texas Tech in the 8-9 matchup. Hope you take the over in that game, because that'll be awesome. Virginia and Ole Miss, interesting matchup in the first round perhaps. Notre Dame and BYU, that'll be also an awesome matchup. And you look at what could happen in the quarters. We could see Alabama and Georgia renewing pleasantries. Ohio State perhaps facing Oregon for the second year in a row in the quarterfinals. Texas A&M, maybe another matchup against an SEC opponent, Ole Miss, and Indiana. Look at this. This is all kind of shaping up nicely, here? Indiana and Notre Dame met in the first round last year. Could they meet in the second round, or the quarterfinals, if you will, this year? All right, back here with the crew, Richard Johnson, AJ McCarron, and Beanie Wells. And Richard, I'm fascinated every time we see these projections. We're in year 2 of this, but it's always exciting when you see a school up there, maybe that's been up there for the first time, right? You see Memphis, you see Ole Miss, you have the new blood into the playoff, a BYU. You see these teams that are going to be maybe here consistently. Notre Dame is back, the runner-up from last year. What jumps out to you about the projected bracket?
Look, we know it won't hold.
Right.
Sorry, BYU.
Maybe.
I want Indiana, Notre Dame Part 2 so badly. Watching that rematch would be incredible. I did a story on Indiana about a month ago, spoke to athletic director Scott Dolson. He told me that coming off the field last year in South Bend, he and Curt Cignetti were already talking about the things that Indiana needed to do to make sure that they could be competitive next year in 2025 if they were to face a team like Notre Dame. Again, I talked to Mark Cuban, Indiana alum. He told me how much he hates Notre Dame. That in-state grudge match, would love to see that if they were able to play again this year.
AJ, is there a matchup that jumps out to you here on the projected field?
I really like the Oregon versus Texas Tech matchup. I think that's your best first-round game. 2 evenly high-powered offenses that can put up a ton of points. And I just really like that matchup. I think it's tough for either team, either way. So that's probably the most intriguing matchup of the first round right now.
I'd have to pick it back off of Richard. I want to see that Indiana-Notre Dame matchup. I thought Indiana last year had an opportunity to feel what it's like to kind of be nationally relevant in the college football world and landscape. And they had that taste, and now they love it. Curt Cignetti is galvanized this organization, and now this team is primed to be in position to not just get a taste, but to really make a legitimate run at a college football playoff championship. Last year, I thought, obviously, they were the surprise Cinderella story of college football, just getting a chance to get there and be in that position where they're talked about. But this year, this team is built completely different, top to bottom. They have a legitimate shot at being the national championship team at the end of the year because of the way Curt Cignetti has orchestrated and delve into diving and getting this team ready to be contending at a national level.
How about a hypothetical Oregon versus Texas Tech matchup, right? Oregon was the team that, with Phil Knight's money, bought their way into college football relevance. Quite frankly, Phil Knight's decision in the early 90s to spend and spend and spend is, quite frankly, the first domino that ends up with Oregon all the way now being in the Big Ten, but playing a Texas Tech team that over the summer spent a whole lot of money on that roster. And guess what? They bought a whole lot of players who can play. And seeing those two teams match up would be such an interesting culture clash, styles make fight situation about how you can spend your way to college football relevance, the old way and the new way.
And Beanie, we could have another matchup of Ohio State and Oregon if the Ducks are able to get past the Red Raiders there. That's also spicy.
Oh, no question about it. And we know how Dan Lanning is when, his back is against the wall and he's already, faced the adversity of going out and being dominated versus Ohio State last season, wanting to get another opportunity to kind of be in that Ali Frazier type atmosphere. I think that would make for an incredible football game. Oregon, we know, is a team that can score with the best of them. And then we know Ohio State, that mammoth of a defense that they have. If they continue this trend, that's a matchup that I most certainly have circled.
As you take a look at Oregon's resume right now, Richard, and we talked a little bit about what they have coming up. They're going on the road to play Iowa. And look, that could be an upset. I mean, this Iowa team is nasty. I mean, they could clamp you down, especially at home.
Oregon's best win to date is Northwestern. I think Oregon is a really, really good football team. But when you look at the resume to date, Oregon's best win is Northwestern. Now, they get a chance to render all of that moot this weekend if they're able to beat Iowa, and then later this season when they face Washington in the rivalry matchup. So it's not going to matter at the end of the season if they can navigate the rest of their schedule unscathed. But to date, Oregon's resume is not good.
Yeah, you take a look at it, and it's the win against Penn State, which basically becomes almost unranked. I mean, in the eyes of what happened, it was a ranked win, but now you look at it, and it sort of gets dumbed down, right? Like, how do you think the committee looks at that kind of qualification? How are they going to look at a team when they go, okay, well, that was a ranked win, but now that team is fallen off the map?
Yeah, I think that the committee has to go on its rankings from here to the end, and they re-rank every week, and they judge teams like that every week. Well, it doesn't matter what Penn State had done to date back at the end of September when Penn State really hadn't beaten anybody on their own resume to date. I was at that game. It was a whiteout atmosphere. It was a really, really electric college football atmosphere. But you've seen what Penn State then went on to do, and now Drew Aller hurt, James Franklin fired, and the season is completely lost for Penn State. But yeah, it's about, if you're going to talk about ranked wins, I'm talking about what the resumes are now when you've got a much more full body of work than just Penn State's non-conference schedule to date, which had such luminaries as I believe Kent State was on it.
Well, this game means more for Oregon, right? Because now they're going to be facing a ranked Iowa squad who comes in as 20th in the nation, according to the College Football Playoff rankings. Let's take a look at the top 25 now so that you can see the teams here that are in the mix. We look at the top 12 here, Texas and Oklahoma, teams on the bubble. Let's go further down on the outside, Utah, Virginia, Louisville, Vanderbilt, Georgia Tech, Miami coming in at 13 through 18. And then after that, it's USC, Iowa, Michigan, Missouri, Washington, Pitt, and Tennessee. And Richard, there's some teams that could perhaps sneak in. Is there a team on the outside looking in that you think may work its way into the field in a month's time from now?
I don't know about working their way all the way up into the field, but I am looking at that Pitt team that's sitting there at, I believe, 24. And I'm saying, that's interesting. They are going to get Notre Dame later in the season. They are going to get Miami later in the season. Watch out for them. Iowa could, frankly, be a dark horse if they make a run here. If they can beat Iowa, if they can navigate the rest of that schedule unscathed, I think they probably have to find a way to sneak into the Big Ten championship game, which means, Ohio State.
Which means Ohio State would lose to Michigan.
Right. Ohio State
that's
would
a possibility.
probably have to lose to Michigan.
Yeah, I know. Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I had to give it to you.
Not a possibility.
You'd have to.
Not a possibility.
I'm sorry, Beanie. I'm sorry.
What did Beanie say? What did Beanie say?
It's not a possibility at all.
Oh, he said, did you say no possibility?
Yeah.
No possibility this year.
They have to play the game in Ann Arbor. There's a possibility, Beanie.
Not agreed.
AJ, can you tell I'm an Ohio State fan? I'm from the same neck of the woods as Beanie is from, so there's always a path, and we're sitting here talking about Iowa having a path. What do you think of that? Because certainly a team that's on the outside, some people might think that they're underrated.
No, I think, listen, Iowa's been so bad on offense for so long that people forget, how good of a team they used to be and how well they've played defense. The surprise team for me, though, guys, is Louisville. I really think Louisville has a chance of getting in. You look at the rest of their schedule. They got Cal, Clemson, SMU, and then Kentucky to end the year. And then, who do they face in the ACC championship? Possibly Georgia Tech. I mean, that's a game they can win. And I really think Louisville has a shot of getting in this thing.
Louisville, Isaac Brown being hurt, we'll see the impact of that on their offense. I was at that Miami-Louisville game when Louisville really announced themselves as a contender in the ACC, not just a dark horse. We'll see how Louisville's offense is able to hold on. I also think we should probably stop overlooking Utah, right? I mean, Utah is also sitting there. We talked about this earlier. I don't think, unless there's a bid stealing situation, don't really think the Big 12 is going to get 2 teams in. But we do have to mention that Utah is still sitting there. Utah has looked good over the last couple weeks, but again, I do think Utah is beating up on teams they are clearly physically better than. My thing with Utah is what happens when you match up with teams that are at about your level. That was the old way where Utah would still be able to throw those teams out of the paint. I don't know if Utah still has it like that.
So if the Big 12 only gets 1 team in, then that opens the door certainly for another SEC team in Texas or Oklahoma, right?
4,
right.
5.
Right.
Say it with me now, folks.
Drive for 5. But Texas and Oklahoma are among the first 2 out here. They're firmly on the bubble, and those are 2 teams that have played each other. Of course, Texas beat Oklahoma. It's a top 10 win for them. Their other win coming against Vanderbilt. That could be a huge factor here if the Big 12 does not get a second team in, because Texas, there are a couple losses here. We know the one about Ohio State. Look, this is a team, some people think they're formidable. Some people think they're not.
Well, you'd have to consider this. If Texas were to win out, they would beat Georgia and they would beat Texas A&M. Now, that might knock Georgia out, or at least put Georgia very much on the ropes themselves. So that may ruin our drive for 5 mantra here, or at least put it into doubt. But Texas has a chance. They just have to win out. I do not think a 3-loss Texas finds their way in.
No way.
Because their loss to Florida is not a good loss at all. Not at all.
How about Vanderbilt? Vanderbilt's a team that I'm really interested in seeing because in the SEC, we all know there's going to be so much carnage down the stretch with these teams that beat themselves up and beat themselves out of a position. But Vanderbilt, in my opinion, could be a team sitting right there that could legitimately win the rest of their football games. I know it'd be a battle, when we look at the deep end of their season, but they could legitimately win the rest of their football games. And they have the 2 losses that they do have are versus very good football teams. So I think you certainly have to consider them, and you look at what they were able to do on the offensive end and how they were able to, come back in that game last week, scoring 21 points in the 4th quarter. It's not out of the realm of possibility that they may not be the team to climb back in this thing.
I love Vanderbilt. AJ, you love Vanderbilt? What do you think of their chances?
Listen, Vandy or Tennessee cancel each other out because
they
they play each other last game of the year, right? So one of those should be 10-2. You look at Texas. If Texas beats A&M and Georgia, they're at 10-2. A&M could be at 11-1 at the end of the year. Bama, if Bama were to slip up against Oklahoma, they're now at 10-2. That means Oklahoma's at 10-2. And then you got Georgia possibly at 10-2. So are you saying we're not going to take 5 or 4 10-2 SEC teams